Hello everybody, Michael the Librarian of Magic here, finding and cataloging the magical and pointing you to it. I am back here today to talk about episode 2 of The Mandalorian, entitled The Child. This episode is going to be filled with all kinds of spoilers, some of them minor, some of them major. They're unavoidable when trying to talk about the plot of the episodes, I think, at this point, and that's just the route I'm going to go with it. So, no off the top, this is going to contain spoilers, and I'm going to jump straight into episode 2 of The Mandalorian, my thoughts and reactions. I will join the chorus of many pundits or commenters that you may have read or listened to thus far that the episode was pretty short. I was very satisfied with what we got, but it did seem a little on the short side. It clocked in at about 28 minutes if you don't count the credits. So it's not necessarily that I was disappointed that it was short, but I just wasn't expecting it to be that short, and maybe that's on me. Maybe that's kind of my fault. But I was well satisfied with what we got. And I did read some comment from Jon Favreau that he was saying the length of the episodes may vary from episode to episode depending on what the story calls for. So this may not necessarily be something to expect in terms of an exact length every single time. The story picks up right where the first episode left off. The Mandalorian now has the yodeling in tow with him, and he is working his way back to his ship, where his ship is on this planet. And as he's going through this canyon area, he gets waylaid by these Trandoshans. The Trandoshans, if you don't remember, are the same species as Bosk, who is one of the bounty hunters in one of Jabba's bounty hunters in The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Got an itchy nose. And so there's a whole bunch of those guys, a whole bunch of these Trandoshans that attack the Mandalorian, and he's able to fight them off. During this really cool action sequence, you see him employ that really interesting looking phase rifle, or whatever you want to call it. It's this long rifle, and it's really cool to see it employed. It like disintegrates some of these guys. Like, it's a huge blast of a shot. I didn't comment in the last episode on the weapon, other than just generally commenting on the style of the pilot episode. But I did want to say, since he gets around to using the weapon and it's featured a bit more in this episode, that the design of that weapon, the way that it looks, is inspired by Boba Fett. So, how can I explain this if you aren't familiar? There's a really maligned piece of Star Wars material out there called the Star Wars Holiday Special, which was made back in the early 80s after the original Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, and it's really not good. And George Lucas just, like, once it aired, he kind of tried to suppress it, like it's non-canonical, it doesn't have anything to do with anything, it was just sort of a one-off thing for funsies. And it kind of makes the rounds here and there as a like underground videotape or DVD, but it's not been officially released in any capacity or anything like that. And I'm in no way arguing that it should be. However, that one interesting thing to note about the holiday special is that it contained the first appearance ever of Boba Fett, the first time we ever see him. There's this animated, like Ralph Bakshi style animated sequence in the midst of that holiday special that features Boba Fett, and he's carrying a weapon in that looks exactly like the weapon that the Mandalorian is carrying in this show. So they were definitely inspired by that style. I'm not saying it's the exact same thing. I'm not saying that they're trying to wrangle in or canonize elements of the holiday special. Another thing to note, though, on that score is in the first episode, the bounty that gets brought in, the guy that's played by Horatio Sands, before he gets frozen in carbonite in the Mandalorian's ship, he makes a offhanded reference to Life Day, where he says, I was hoping to go home and see my wife and kids for Life Day, but I'm not sure that's going to happen now, and then he gets frozen. Life Day is also a reference to the Star Wars Holiday Special. Life Day is this holiday that Wookiees celebrate. That's the holiday in question in the holiday special. And apparently other species do, or I don't know. Maybe that guy was just spitballing to try to save his own life at that juncture in the show. I'm not sure. Anyway, Star Wars Holiday Special references in the show. Maybe they're just sort of a wink at the fans, people who know about that stuff. I don't think in any way, shape, or form that they're trying to, push for releasing the holiday special or canonization of it or anything like that. If you're thinking those sorts of things. Anyway, he uses the weapon in the scene against the Trandoshans, like vaporizes a bunch of them, but gets pretty roughed up in the process as he's trying to save himself and the little yodeling that I've taken to calling him until we know more about him, or it, I should say, because we don't even know if it's gendered or what. And so he's working his way back toward his ship. At one point after the battle has occurred, they take a time out to camp, and the Mandalorian is wounded, and he's trying to like cauterize his wound with this like electrical thing. And we see for a brief moment that it looks like the little yodeling is trying to heal the Mandalorian's wound with force powers, or at least he's attempting to do that. And the Mandalorian stops him from doing that and picks it. The yodeling leaves his little bassinet thing and walks over to him, and then the Mandalorian sees what he's doing and stops him from doing it, or maybe isn't sure what he's doing. I don't think at this juncture that regular people in the galaxy like the Mandalorian would have had any sort of understanding or knowledge of the Force. That stuff has been really suppressed for a long time at this point in the story. Not a lot of people know about it or even believe in it. So he probably wouldn't have even known what was happening. We would have known more as an audience what it appeared that the yodeling was trying to do. But anyway, he picks him up. Hey, you got out of your bassinet thingy. Get back in. So he puts him back in, and he stops doing that. But as far as I know, as far as I can think of or remember, and I have not read all of the expanded universe stuff or anything like that, or but I have seen all the films many times. As far as I know, there aren't any instances of people using the Force to heal somebody else. I mean, there are instances, there is knowledge that the power of the Force, particularly on the dark side, one of the things that draws Anakin over to the dark side is the notion that he could potentially learn how to bring people back from the dead. And whether or not that's true or a lie, I'm not sure. That information comes from an unreliable source in the form of Palpatine. But at least it's in the Star Wars lore that the Force can do all sorts of powerful, mysterious things that we're not all 100% sure of. So at any rate, it may be that this little creature has the ability to heal like maybe minor wounds with the Force, and that is sort of an interesting thing. I think that's pretty new, to the best of my knowledge. Like I said, I am pretty knowledgeable as a Star Wars nerd, and probably know more than the average person or Star Wars fan about deep Star Wars lore, but I am by no means super duper mega memorable with all the details of the stuff out there. There are some people who really lock that information in, and I have to use references and stuff like that from time to time. I can't always remember it all, but I have a passing familiarity with a lot of things in the Star Wars universe. Also, on the score of the expanded universe, just a quick thing that I wanted to say in this video while I got around to it. When I'm talking about the expanded universe and talking about Star Wars lore and things like that, unless I specifically mention it, like the Star Wars Holiday Special, as being non-canonical, if I talk about anything in this series or any of my breakdown videos about Star Wars in general and reference extraneous lore, expanded universe lore outside of the films or TV shows that is considered canon, I'm talking specifically about the new canon, the Disney canon that was instituted when Disney bought Star Wars back in 2014, and not the old canon, which is existed under Lucasfilm for many, many years and is now referenced as Legends. Not that those things are uninteresting or have any sort of value or don't get used from time to time in the new canon. They do, but I want to be very clear that I'm talking about what is considered actual, canon under Disney Star Wars umbrella as we know it. That's what the official story is, as we know it now. And that's what I'm specifically referencing. And if I'm talking about any other outside sources or extraneous Star Wars materials that aren't, such as the Star Wars Holiday Special, I will do my best to make that clear. So I just wanted to also get that out of the way. So then, in the show, getting back to the show, the Mandalorian works his way back to his ship, and he finds that it is a total wreck. It's been totally stripped down by all of these Jawas. And a couple of interesting things to note in this scene. Finally comes some lines of dialogue after these sequences, or even, well, I guess you can even call it dialogue. I guess Jawa dialogue, but the first probably 11 minutes or so of this 28-minute episode have no dialogue at all. It's just music and sound effects and everything like that, and it's still very effective visual storytelling. So that's a very interesting thing to note, that this episode in general is very, very sparing and light on the dialogue, which is an interesting effect of having the Mandalorian as your main character. I think that's one of the reasons why it's light on the dialogue, because he's not a very talkative character. But also, I think it is still a nod to those spaghetti westerns and samurai epics. In a lot of those movies, like Once Upon a Time in the West, for example, which is a Sergio Leone classic, a spaghetti western, I think the first 20-25 minutes of that film is totally dialogue free, and it's like the super intense close-up visual storytelling. If you've never seen Once Upon a Time in the West and you are interested in westerns or a fan of westerns in general, that's one that I can highly recommend. And if you do try to see it, if that is something you're interested in, try to see it on the biggest screen you can possibly find. It's one of those movies that's just visually massive. Anyway, I think those things are part of contributing to the whole overall feel of the show, and the lack of dialogue and so on. So back to the plot. The Mandalorian finds that his ship is totally useless now. It's been totally stripped down by these Jawas, and that's another interesting point, that this planet, as far as we can discern, as far as we've been revealed in the show so far, it's not Tatooine, the desert planet that we're familiar with from the original trilogy of movies, and the prequel trilogy as well. We know it's not that planet, but yet there are Jawas here, and Trandoshans and other races and creatures that we're slightly familiar with from the other movies. So apparently Jawas have spread their enterprises, their junk collecting enterprises, out onto other planets. And they do look slightly different than the Jawas from the original trilogy. They have like different colored eyes and slightly different colored robes and stuff like that. But yeah, so they're on this planet as well, and they have a full sandcrawler, just like they do in A New Hope. And they make off with all the parts, and the sandcrawler takes off, but the Mandalorian starts to chase on foot and starts to chase down the sandcrawler, and there's this great action sequence that follows where he's trying to climb up the side of it, and he's throwing Jawas off, and they're throwing stuff at him, and they're taking him out, and it's really cool. And there's a lot of nods to Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, where the scene where Indy is dangling from the side of a tank, and he's getting crushed up against the side of a cliff, and tank treads and all that. Sandcrawler is very similar to like a big tank, and there's some shots in there that are almost the same. It's like very reminiscent. They clearly had that on the brain when they made this sequence. So the Mandalorian fights off all of the Jawas from, as he climbs up, and he finally gets to the top, where there's a bigger group of Jawas on the very top, and they like electrocute him with this electricity weapon, and he gets like stunned by it, and then just falls all the way off immediately falls off the top and just lands on the bottom. And they take off, and so then he has to go back to the Ugnaught from the previous episode, played by Nick Nolte. He has to go back to his homestead and say, the Jawas took all my stuff. And the Ugnaught says, well, we're going to have to go negotiate with them and try to figure out, how we can make this work so you can get off this planet with your bounty. And he's willing to help him out. So they go back to the Jawas and they try to negotiate getting all of the parts back for the Mandalorian's ship. And eventually they land on the price of the Jawas want this egg. All they just keep saying is egg, 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 egg. And the Mandalorian agrees. So they take him in their sandcrawler to this sort of ruddy little canyon-looking area that has like a big pit, like a big hole cave in the side of it, and leave him there with the yodeling in tow. And the Mandalorian has to go down in there and figure out what this egg they're talking about is. And there's this big old creature in there. It's like a big woolly rhino, and it charges out and starts fighting the Mandalorian, and it really messes him up. He doesn't fare too well against this woolly rhino thing. It really like messes up all of his armor, and he's just getting really beat up by this thing pretty badly. Getting thrashed around, and then eventually it's ruining his weapons and armor and everything like that. And eventually he just sort of in an act of desperation pulls his knife out and waits for the rhino to charge. And he's like, you get the impression that he's just going to sort of, either kill or be killed with this thing. And then the yodeling from its little bassinet thing uses the force to pull the rhino creature off the ground, so he's no longer on the ground, and the creature is super mystified and doesn't know what to do with it. And then the yodeling sort of zaps all of its powerness to do that, and the rhino creature hits the ground, and with the element of surprise, the Mandalorian is able to stab it and take it out. And then he goes and finds the egg inside of the lair, and it's like just as woolly as the rhino thing. I thought that was kind of a cool production choice. So this big egg is just like this super hairy brown mop Chewbacca looking egg. And he takes it back to this artifact back to the Jawas, and it turns out they really just want to eat it. They whack the top off of it, and then they're all just like taking this orange goo, like Winnie the Pooh with a honey pot. They're just like getting messy with it, and it's kind of funny. Like that's all they really wanted, I guess, was to eat this thing. But then he gets all the parts for his ship back, and then he's able to go back to the Ugnaughts' homestead, and they have this really 80s reminiscent montage of rebuilding the Mandalorian's ship, and they do it all, and they're very grateful to each other. They have some really touching dialogue for each other. The Mandalorian actually kind of wants him to join with him together, and the Ugnaught says, no, I came out here to be in solitude. I don't want to live a life of service anymore, and all that sort of stuff. And they have some really nice moments together. And then at the end of the episode, the ship takes off. The Mandalorian and the yodeling are on their way. And that's kind of it. It sort of ends on the ship that they make it off the planet. So it's sort of an interesting in-between episode. We find out a lot more about the nature of the yodeling, and see a little bit more about this planet that they found it on. But we don't really get too much more than that. There's some really interesting action scenes. That's kind of the heart of this particular episode. We see some really kind of fun gags here and there, like the yodeling gets out of his bassinet at one point when they're wandering around on the Ugnaughts' homestead, and he finds a frog and like eats the frog whole. And the yodeling character design is super duper cute, and you see a lot more of the cuteness in this episode. I'm sure that at some point really soon there will be a lot of like little yodeling merch, and you could probably buy some little cute things. I know my wife would really want to have one. She's pretty enamored so far with the cute design of the little creature, and he is really adorable in this particular episode. So that's really kind of the focus of it. You're sort of slowly learning things about the characters, about the abilities of the little yodeling, who is 50 years old, so he's had some time. It's had some time to learn some things, obviously, and apparently those creatures, whatever the Yoda species are, from what we've seen, we've only seen 3 of them in all of Star Wars lore. They appear to be just naturally force-sensitive beings with those abilities, even at a young, for them, age. And so that's sort of what we learn. We just get to see the yodeling do some different and interesting things, and the humorous aspects of the Mandalorian trying to fight off the Jawas and all that stuff. So that's really the episode. I did want to give a shout out to the score, which I kind of briefly mentioned in the other episode, and it just sort of keeps getting better for me. I can't remember the name uh, of the composer. I will. It'll pop in on the side here in just a second when I put that in post. But he has done a magnificent job with this score. I think they sort of let him be super inventive and change up the themes of things in each episode. It's really new for a Star Wars project. It feels really fresh. It's not, you don't always get the same Star Wars themes that you're used to. And believe me, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the masterpiece John Williams themes, or even echoing those John Williams themes. But this series is tending so far to go in a totally different direction, and it's really interesting the choices they're making. And it's sort of developing its own Mandalorian theme, and I've really been enjoying it. I am interested to see how they keep developing the score and how it may change in the future of each episode, and when they get around to releasing some score or soundtrack album, I'm sure I will pick that up at some point because I'm very much enjoying it. So that's really episode 2 of The Mandalorian, called The Child. There were some minor spoilers here, I know, but it wasn't a huge, massive plot reveal episode. There is a lot of character spoilers, though, a lot of character stuff that I went through in this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing about this. Hopefully it was entertaining and informative. Thank you in advance for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Let me know if you're enjoying The Mandalorian, if you were surprised by some of the things in this episode, especially about the powers of the yodeling, the way that I was. Anyway, let me know. Let me know what your reactions to, or even if you aren't liking it, or what. Any feedback is great. Feel free to interact. So I will be back again. New episodes of everything should be released this coming Friday, and I will watch those and comment on them whenever I'm able to. And until then, thanks as always for watching. I hope you have a spectacular day, and I hope this has added a little magic to it. So take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.